Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Kellen with Apex Archery and we are continuing our search for the very best in longer axle-to-axle 2024 flagship hunting bows. Today in studio and under test, we do have the LIFT 33 from Mathews. Mathews is claiming that this is lighter, quieter, and yet faster than any hunting bow that they've produced before. Can't wait to put this thing to the test, see how it shoots, and find out. Let's get into it. Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Kellen with Apex Archery and today we have the LIFT 33 from Mathews in for testing. I am unbelievably excited to get shooting on this bow because of a lot of the claimed specs for this model. This is a 33-inch axle-to-axle model boasting a 6.5-inch brace height. They're claiming that that is going to be producing IBO speeds of 343 feet per second, all with a claimed system weight for an aluminum risered bow of 4.26 pounds. It will accommodate draw lengths of 26 out to 31.5 inches, and the MSRP on this bad boy is coming in at $14.29. Before we actually dig in and do some quick analysis of this bow and get shooting, I need to pause to give a quick thank you to a friend of the channel, and that is Bear Creek Archery in Inglewood, Colorado. They are generous enough to be donating all of the bows that we are putting through the paces here at Apex Archery for this year. They also happen to be the shop that I trust for all of my arrow building, all of my bow builds. Anytime that I'm tinkering, I'm in there seeing and troubling their pro staff. If you have any archery needs, please, I would encourage you to stop by and see my friends over at Bear Creek Archery. All right, so let's get into this bow because the claims on this thing are enormous. The first thing that I want to do is actually verify what's coming out of the factory from Mathews. So let's go ahead and check first that actual axle-to-axle measurement. And if I measure from center of axle to center of axle, I do get that this is just a little bit long. This is coming in at 33 1/8 inches. Next up, we will check that brace height. Remember, we're looking for 6.5 inches to the center of that string. And if I measure from the center to the deepest part of that grip, I do get 6.5 inches exactly. The next thing that I'm very interested to see is the actual riser length. Remember, I love a long riser relative to the axle-to-axle measurement. The longer that riser, the more it really gets a lot of the system weight, the limb pocket, the actual cam system and limbs out away from your hand and helps to present with a lot more stability when you're on target and at full draw. Really, the riser can be thought of as your vertical position stabilizer, again, when you're shooting this bow. And this appears to be quite long. So if I measure from the top of the limb pocket where it's actually supporting and pivoting the limbs, which is where I'm measuring for all of the bows this year, I do get a total riser length of 33 1/2 inches. So the riser on this guy is actually longer than the axle-to-axle measurement that we are getting. That gives us a riser to axle ratio of 101.1%. That riser is really getting into target bow territory in terms of its overall length. This thing should be unbelievably stable when we are at full draw. Next, we will measure from that pivot point and we will actually check the reflex of this riser. And remember, I prefer a lower reflex measurement. The smaller that reflex, the less impact that torque at the grip is going to have on where your arrow ultimately lands. So if I measure from that pivot point, again, to the deepest part of the grip, I am getting about 1 3/4 inches with that factory grip. So not the smallest measurement that we've seen so far this year, but not out of order by any means. Next, I would really like to check the weight. So again, they are claiming that this guy is quieter, lighter, and faster than any hunting bow that they've produced before. Let's see how close we get to that 4.26 claimed system weight from this Mathews. And this is coming in at exactly 4.40 pounds. 4.40. So just about a tenth of a pound over what they are actually claiming and significantly lighter. Almost a third of a pound lighter than any other bow that we've had on test so far this year. Again, for an aluminum bow with the longest riser we've tested as well. Last but not least, let's go ahead and check the limb width. Remember, a lot of the manufacturers moving to a wider and wider limb stance, claiming that that's going to increase the stability that you have at full draw over the system. And when I do check with my calipers here, I am getting just under 3 inches. We'll call it 2 7/8 inches in terms of that limb width. All right, I'm very excited to begin putting some arrows to this guy. Let me throw a rest on it, meet me out on the range, and I will give you my very first shooting impressions for the Lift 33. All right, we are stepping outside now with the Lift 33 from Mathews. Very excited to put a couple of arrows to this guy to really get a sense for how that very long riser and this platform feels when I'm at full draw. One thing that is immediately noticeable is that this bow is light. It's just undeniable, especially considering how kind of like large and imposing the bow actually looks in hand because of those riser dimensions. It just feels so light, again, when it's completely stripped down like this. Really, really impressive. Still can't believe that they were able to machine all of that aluminum out of the riser and still give us a solid shooting platform. And one thing to note, we do only have available right now the 85% let-off mods. The 80% let-off will be available in the near future, as is advertised, but I do expect that this thing's going to dump a little bit more than I would hope that it would if we are in that 80% let-off setting. So the draw is relatively smooth. Creates a decent string angle. Almost no vibration on the shot, a little bit right away when the arrow goes, very little hop or movement in the riser, which is impressive for a bow that, again, isn't built at all and has such a low weight. Draw cycle's great, really no complaints. Stacks maybe a little bit more than some of their bows in the past, kind of right up front. That's where we're gonna get some of that extra energy from to produce those speeds that they're advertising, but overall, really impressed off that first shot. And that back wall is totally solid. If I really, really push into it, maybe a millimeter of sponge, but I have to really pull. Breaks clean. Immediately, one of the things that's also very noticeable in addition to that lightweight is this does to my ear sound more quiet than the other bows that we've had on test so far this year. It's not a huge difference, but if I'm looking for it, it is absolutely noticeable, and I'll be very curious to see what the sound rating is when we bring this thing back outside for the sound test in a little bit. Yeah, almost no hop, very, very dead in hand on the shot. Again, incredibly impressed. One thing I am going to ding Mathews for is this grip. It's just too rounded and kind of textured, getting a little bit wider here, adding width where I don't really want it to be ultra repeatable. That said, you can take this off and replace it with the side plates, either from them or a host of other aftermarket manufacturers, but this grip just kind of doesn't really belong on a high performance bow in my opinion. That said, overall, unbelievably impressed with this bow from Mathews. So far, my estimation is that it is going to be a little bit speedier than some of their bows in the past, and I'll be very curious to see how those speeds stack up to some of the other bows that we have on test this year. It does strike me as being noticeably quieter, and then the weight is just undeniable, again, especially for such a large bow in terms of that riser dimension. Let's head back inside and put this thing on the draw board, take a look at some of the dynamic specifications so that we can really understand how we got that shooting performance. All right, we are back inside with the Lift 33, now into our draw board and into the full draw position. We got really good shooting performance out on the range. Let's dive into some of the technical specifications and how it changes at full draw to see if we can better understand how we got such good shooting performance. The first thing that I'm going to look into is the actual string to string measurement. That is not just a function of the actual axle position or the limb deflection, but also how large is the circumference of the actual cam system from the manufacturer. As we can see, Mathews continues with their new Switch Weight X cams to champion the larger circumference in terms of those cams. And it really supports the string and begins to kind of curve out at about this point on those cams. So when I do go ahead and measure out to that point, I am getting close to 34¼ inches in terms of string to string angle. Really pretty generous, especially coming out of a 33-inch axle to axle bow. Next, let's go ahead and actually look into the updated axle to axle measurement based as a function of the limb deflection. As we can see, the limb deflection is very aggressive in this system, meaning that those limbs are really doing a lion's share of the work for this bow. So if I measure our updated axle to axle here, I am getting 29¾ inches. Remember, we got 33⅛ inches when we were kind of completely static or had it on the table. That means that our total deflection is 3�3/8 inches. So way more than what we're seeing from other manufacturers out on the market today. Next, let's go ahead and look at the actual string angle itself. So as a little bit of a taller archer, one thing that I like to see is a relatively generous, like larger or more slack string angle. Really helps me to keep a very vertical neck position and find my reference points easily when I'm at full draw. So if I measure down the center of the arrow through the nocking point to the center of the string, I do get about 36.5 degrees as far as that string angle. Really pretty good, very middle of the road for a longer axle to axle bow. Next up, let's actually go ahead and verify their draw length. A lot of manufacturers this year are claiming 30 inches. That's how we set and shoot these bows. That said, many of them are coming in a little bit long. Mathews is no different. They are about 1/4 inch longer than the advertised 30 inches for draw length with this particular Mod M bow. Ultimately, that gives us a power stroke of 23�¾ inches. And from that, we can throw it on the dyno and actually generate a draw force curve. So as we can see there, nothing too unusual. Actually a relatively smooth shooting or drawing bow. It stacks very evenly for about the first 25% before a relatively gradual let off in the final 25% of that actual draw to what is ultimately closer to 82% in terms of let off. So despite the fact that these are 85% let off mods, we're getting a holding weight of 13.4 pounds, putting us a little bit closer to 81 or 82% in terms of let off. The total area under the curve in terms of inch pounds for the draw force for this bow is 1,210.6. So really pretty middle of the pack as far as the bows that we've tested so far this year. That said, they are still claiming an IBO speed of 343 feet per second, meaning these cams are going to have to be very efficient to produce speeds that are anywhere close to the top of the heap, like what they're claiming. So with that, why don't I go ahead and grab my 350, 400, and 450 grain arrows, meet me back out on the range. Let's go ahead and test the speeds on this bow. All right, we are stepping out on the range with that all-new cam system in the Lift 33 from Mathews. Very excited, given the draw force curve, to see what kind of speeds we can actually get out of this bow. They're advertising a relatively high IBO, again, relative to how smooth this thing draws and the amount of stored energy in that power stroke by way of the draw force curve. As is always the case, I did double check this particular bow before stepping out for the speed testing. It is pulling 69.82 pounds, so right at about that 70-pound mark. This guy is set to the 30-inch position, as well as 85% let off, and this first arrow is exactly 350 grains. Let's see what kind of speeds we can get. That first shot going 332.0 feet per second. Easily the fastest arrow at ATA spec that we've had out of any of our bows so far this year. That suggests that this is an unbelievably efficient cam system. Next up is a 400 grain arrow. That going 310.5 feet per second. And last but not least is a 450 grain airstrike. So again, getting much closer now to the type of spec that we would expect to see for your true hunting weight arrows out in the field. that going 292.6 feet per second. All things considered, those are blazing speeds considering how easy this bow is to draw, as well as the actual stored energy again in that draw force curve. I almost can't believe how they're able to do that. All right, we are back inside after that very impressive speed performance out there with the Lift 33 from Mathews. Just to make sure that we weren't completely crazy, I did go ahead and grab 350 grain arrows. I grabbed 3 different ones. We shot it over the chronograph a total of 8 different times to build an average. We did get an average of 330.6 feet per second, again with that 350 grain arrow. So that is the speed that we are going to give this thing. This thing is producing unbelievable speeds compared to the rest of the bows that we've had on test so far this year, and especially when you consider how easy drawing this bow is and that 6.5-inch brace height, which is very forgiving. All of that speed is coming from a brand new limb and cam assembly for Mathews this year. They have moved away from their long-standing switch weight cams and onto the switch weight X, which we can see is still large in terms of circumference and diameter, but is a little bit of a more aggressive profile. What's really cool is they are also carrying forward their module-based technology for how you actually impact 3 different metrics on these cams. That is, by changing out the mods, you can change your draw length, your let-off, and the peak weight for the actual bow system. So if you want to switch between, say, a 65-pound target bow or an 80-pound hunting bow, all you need to do is get a different mod. You don't actually have to change out the limbs. Really, really cool system there that the engineers say allows them to eke out incremental efficiency at every draw length, every peak weight, whatever it may be. So that's really kind of how you do all of that adjustment there to that new switch weight X cam system that is so efficient. As far as your tuning options, all of that is done by removing the axle and playing with the top hat system there. And while we're talking about the axle, there is a new axle assembly. So they've done this machined piece of aluminum that actually suspends the axle up off of the actual limb itself. The engineers saying that that provides more surface area for the limbs themselves to do work on the actual shot. All right, now let's talk about some of the features of this bow because it is feature-packed. Starting with the limbs themselves, let's talk about resistance phase dampening. So that is a technology that they had piloted in years past. It is effectively an 8-limb design where both the top and the bottom have 2 sets of 4 limbs each, and those limbs are sandwiched on this elastomer kind of middle section that is said to kill vibration and sound right there kind of at the source and in the limbs on the shot. I have to say, the perceived like hand shock or any of the vibration felt in the riser is unbelievably minimal, so that does seem to be working incredibly well. And now let's talk about the actual sound on the shot as well, because let's not forget, they are promising that this is going to be lighter, faster, and quieter. That is Mathews marketing speak about this particular model bow. We did have a chance to take this thing outside. We did shoot a 400 grain arrow with our decibel meter placed exactly 3 feet horizontally from the central shooting position of the bow itself. And of course, we generated the quietest bow that we've had on test so far, 73.4 decibels. To give you some sense of where that's coming in, our average so far for every bow tested is 78.9 decibels. So we are coming in fully, 5.5 decibels lower than any other bow on our test. Just to remind everyone, decibels are not a linear scale. They're actually a logarithmic scale. So when you're talking about a difference of 5 or 6 decibels, it does become quite noticeable and perceptible. One of the first things that I noticed when I was shooting is, man, this is an unbelievably quiet bow. Moving up the riser, they are continuing to machine in a dovetail surface to the back here for your rest mounting interface. Lots of manufacturers on the market taking that approach, again, giving you lots of options from manufacturers to get rest integrated directly onto the back of that riser and really move as much of the mass of the system into the center line of that bow. Speaking of alignment, they are also carrying forward their bridge lock technology. So they are continuing this dovetail cutout here on the riser where you can actually slide a Mathews specific sight or sight bar directly into the riser, again, getting the center of the mass of the sight closer and closer to the riser itself. And then they also have bridge lock by way of their target and hunting stabilizer bars. So another type of patented cutout there in the riser from Mathews that allows you you to use their own bars to actually slide directly into the riser itself. So that is how you kind of lock in your stabilizers if you are using the Mathews specific stabilizers. All right, they are continuing with what they are calling center guard cable containment. So they've actually created an angle here for the carbon fiber center roller guard bar that actually places the roller guards themselves right there in line with the center of the arrow and gives you the most vane clearance possible, while also keeping the tension on the cables throughout the draw cycle as even as is possible. So a really, really cool system that they are continuing to carry forward. Next, let's talk about the grip itself and something really neat that is hidden underneath this grip. First and foremost, the one thing that I will ding Mathews for is the Engage grip that comes with this bow. I just don't love the profile. It's just too kind of humped and rounded for me to create like a really repeatable shooting performance out of this bow. That said, most people end up just removing that grip entirely and shooting with side plates, which you can purchase aftermarket from Mathews or from a host of third-party manufacturers. But what's really interesting here is you've got this little sticker that indicates that this is ShotSense compatible. We will do another video all about ShotSense, but ShotSense is a small computer system that can be embedded directly into the riser of the bow itself to give you all sorts of performance tracking as it relates to how steady you hold on target, what are your different aiming and holding patterns and follow-through patterns look like, your bubble level, your torque applied, all sorts of really interesting metrics that shooters can hopefully use to improve their shooting performance and to dial into specific things that they might work on in searching out better and better accuracy from their bow. So really cool system there. It does not come with the bow. It is about a $350 additional feature that you can purchase, but this bow, as well as the previous year's Phase 4, are compatible with that ShotSense technology. Finally, they are talking this year about their brand new match bowstrings. So one thing that the engineers at Mathews were sick and tired of seeing was lots of folks running out and immediately ripping off the strings and cables from their bow from the factory and putting on higher quality kind of aftermarket strings. So they really went to kind of the ground floor there and did a full up redesign of their string building process, promising better materials and a much more high performance string directly from the factory. So that is the match bowstrings. I have limited experience with this so far. I've only put, about a dozen arrows through this particular bow, so I can't comment on that performance. That said, I have spoken directly with a number of shooters that have been shooting the match bowstrings on the Title bow, their target bow that had come out earlier this year. And by all accounts, it seems that those strings are holding up incredibly well and proving to be very, very durable. So really cool to see a very high quality bowstring coming directly from the manufacturer and included in that $1429 MSRP price. Last but not least, let's talk about stand options. So I actually think Mathews maybe does the best job with the stands. They have a patent on these limb legs, which clip right into the limb pocket itself and kind of twist around there to create a 3 contact point stand for the bow that keeps the entire bow up off the ground. Not only is it easy to install, but it's also very, very lightweight. They have moved to what they're calling the Engage EXO limb leg, so it is a new design for this year specific to the width of this particular limb pocket, but it is very, very lightweight. And because it does touch just the limb pocket, you can actually leave it on there during all of your shooting. So if you want, plan on having that on there as an aftermarket accessory if you plan on setting your bow down, and just go ahead and balance and shoot your bow with those Engage limb legs right there and in place. A really, really cool system, and just continuing to get better with the LIFT 33 from Mathews. All right, so that is really kind of our all-in wrap-up on this bow. All things considered, unbelievably impressed with this thing. Producing great speeds with a generous brace height, very, very agreeable and smooth drawing bow and draw force curve, and the lightest bow that we've had on test, even though it is manufactured of aluminum and not carbon fiber. And again, coming to you for a very middle-of-the-pack price of $1429. If you liked this particular review, please give us a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, or follow us on Instagram. Please also tell your friends and pass this along to anybody else that would find it valuable. Your support means so much to us. We are going to continue to review longer axle-to-axle hunting bows for 2024, ultimately arriving at a review of reviews, where we really kind of take all of these bows and what we've learned about them, go head-to-head, and award our first ever Apex Archery Bow of the Year. Look forward to seeing you on the next one.